Before death came, life had been kind to the Alukos. Their mansion in the heart of Ibadan stood proud behind tall gates, surrounded by flowering shrubs and the soft hum of wealth. Chief Damilola Aluko was a respected businessman, known for his kindness as much as his ambition. He loved his wife, Mabel, with quiet devotion, the kind you saw in the way he touched her back during parties or always brought Ronke chin-chin from his business trips. Their 3 children wanted for nothing. Teo had dreams of becoming an engineer. Simi loved to paint. Little Ronke collected storybooks like treasure. Then one morning, Chief didn't wake up. They thought he was sleeping in, until Mabel touched his shoulder and felt the stiffness. Just like that, the house that once held laughter began to echo with silence. The burial came quickly, heavy with dust, tears, and expensive lace. The compound overflowed with mourners, politicians, and pastors. Mabel stood like stone, her hands clutching her children as her husband's siblings cried louder than anyone else. But after the burial, the atmosphere soured. Whispers became rumors. And then, one night, in the living room once filled with family laughter, his older brother, Uncle Bode, said it plainly, "Mabel, stop pretending. You know you killed him." Gasps followed. "You drained his strength," Auntie Remy added. "Even his dreams changed after you married him. You're a witch, and now your charms have backfired." Mabel was speechless. Her throat burned, but no words came out. Teo stepped forward, fists clenched, but she pulled him back. Over the next few days, things escalated. The family accountant stopped taking her calls. Chief's businesses were reviewed, and access to bank accounts mysteriously vanished. One morning, the housekeeper told her the car keys were now with the new family head. That afternoon, the chief's siblings came with guards, not strangers, but men who had once opened the gate with warm greetings. They said they were following orders, "Madam," one said awkwardly, eyes lowered, "Oga's family say you must leave now. You know, get right to stay for here again." Mabel begged. On her knees, she pleaded, "Please, at least let my children finish the term." This was their father's house. But her cries fell on deaf ears, they didn't care. They closed behind her and her children like a tomb, final and cold. From a life of comfort, they were now strangers in the street, carrying grief, plastic bags, and shame. The bus ride to Oyen was long and dusty. Mabel sat by the window with Ronke asleep on her lap, her face blotchy from crying. Teo stared blankly ahead while Simi bit her lip to keep from sobbing. They had left everything behind, photos, clothes, even the carved wooden stool Chief loved. Everything but their memories and a small nylon bag of clothes. And the shame, that followed like a shadow. When they reached the village, Mabel's mother's compound stood just as she remembered, cracked walls, a crooked mango tree, and chickens scurrying around. Mama hugged her daughter tightly, though her frame had shrunk with age. "Ah, my Pekin," she whispered, stroking Mabel's hair. "You should have told me things were this bad." But it didn't take long for the welcome to wear thin. Mabel's elder brother, Kunal, looked at them like uninvited pests. "I have my own children," he said the second night. "For extra mouths. You think this is Lagos? There's no free food here." His wife barely disguised her irritation either, tossing burned yam peels at Simi and barking orders like they were servants. Ronke cried every night. Teo offered to sleep outside once, just to give the younger ones room. One afternoon, as Mabel returned from the stream with a calabash of water, Kunal stopped her in the compound. "You know," he said quietly, "people in the village are saying what your in-laws said, that maybe you used something on your husband. That you're bad luck." His voice was calm. "I'm not saying I believe it. But look at how things keep falling apart around you." That night, while the others slept, Mabel sat awake beside her children, her back against the mud wall and wept. She wept for a husband lost, for the loss of security for her children and a happiness that was brutally taken away. She had thought her mother's home would offer rest, but even here, whispers followed her. The next morning, before sunrise, Colonel dropped the final blow. You have 1 more week. Then you and your children must find somewhere else. I can't continue to feed you and your children, it is a burden I am unwilling to bear. This was the same person who had benefited from her when her husband was alive. They had given him huge amounts of money to start up one business or the other. He had failed so many times, yet they didn't stop being there for him and his family. Yet now that the tables had turned, they were considered a burden. And so, once again, Mabel packed what little they had. This time, there were no buses, no goodbyes. Just a quiet walk into uncertainty, barefoot, with 4 shadows, and nowhere left to call home. They found it at the edge of a construction site, an uncompleted building with open walls and no roof. Mabel brushed away the broken glass and laid flattened cartons on the ground. The children huddled around her, shivering in the wind. Rain came through the open blocks that night, soaking them where they lay. Still, it was better than hearing another relative say, "You're not welcome here." The next morning, Mabel made a decision. She sold her last gold bangle, a wedding gift, and bought sachets of groundnut and oranges from a trader. That afternoon, she and Simi walked the market streets, trays on their heads, shame swallowed. "Don't look down," Mabel told her daughter. "Look strong, even if you don't feel it." Simi nodded, lips pressed tight. They returned with little money, but it felt like gold. Teo, determined not to be left behind, started helping drivers wash their cars for tips. Even Ronke, only 9, carried empty bottles to trade for coins. Poverty was now their teacher, and they were learning quickly. Weeks turned into months. Each day was a battle between heat, hunger, and humiliation. The building where they slept now had other squatters, boys who smoked at night, men who eyed Simi too long. Mabel never slept deeply, always one hand on Ronke, one ear open. Simi's feet blistered from walking barefoot. Mabel tried to sew sandals from scrap rubber. They shared 1 bar of soap between them, made one meal stretch across the day. Still, somehow, they stayed together. "At least we have each other," Simi whispered one night, pressing her back to her mother's. "That's something." Mabel looked at her daughter, this girl who should be in school, laughing with friends, not learning to dodge men's hands in the market. Her heart ached, but her spirit refused to break. They would survive. Somehow. News filtered in slowly. Chief Aluko's brothers were now driving his cars, living in his estate, collecting rent from his properties in Lekki and Ibadan. One of them, Uncle Bode, opened a nightclub in Lagos with Chief's name. Aluko Lounge, they called it. Mabel heard it from a customer while hawking oranges. The anger threatened to choke her. Her children were sleeping in dust, while the people who threw them out were throwing parties. Still, she stayed silent. She had no lawyer. No documents. No one who would listen. But Simi was not as calm. "Why aren't we fighting back?" she asked one day. "They're thieves. They're monsters. They said you killed Daddy." Mabel turned, eyes full of quiet fury. "Because right now, we are fighting for food. When God is ready, he will fight for justice." Simi didn't understand then. But she would. It started like any other day. They were hawking by the roadside near a shopping complex when a black Jeep slowed. A man stepped out, tall, well-dressed, his eyes hidden behind sunglasses. He looked once, twice, then walked straight to Mabel. "Madam." "Mabel?" She blinked. "Yes. It's me. Ifani." Her knees buckled slightly. Ifani, her husband's old friend. His business partner. A man who had dined at their table. His face twisted with horror as he looked at Simi, then Teo. "What are you doing here like this?" he demanded. "Why didn't you call me? Where's your phone? Where's the house?" And just like that, everything burst from her lips, the betrayal, the accusations, the eviction. That night, they slept in Ifani's guest house. On real beds. with clean sheets. For the first time in a year, Mabel cried not from hunger, but relief. Ifani couldn't sleep. He called his wife, who returned from Abuja the next morning, and cried at the sight of Ronke's ribs. He paced their living room, furious. How did they throw her out like a criminal? He called their former lawyer, a retired man in his 60s, and demanded answers. You helped Chief draft his will, he said. You know what he wanted. The lawyer sighed. I was shut out. They forged a new document. Claimed Mabel wasn't legally married. Claimed the children weren't registered properly. Ifani exploded. We're taking this to court. If they want war, we'll give them one. For Damilola's sake. Mabel was hesitant. Lawyers meant courts. Courts meant delay, stress, pain. But Ifani wouldn't take no. He paid for new clothes for the children. He paid for transport. He took them to the law firm himself and introduced them to Barrister Uma, a fierce, no-nonsense man who didn't smile much. He read the case file and looked up. We're going to bury them. All of them. They thought you were powerless. But we're going to teach them that God sees everything. Mabel said nothing. She just nodded, and for the first time in a long time, her eyes were sharp. The case dragged for months. Chief Aluko's siblings hired expensive lawyers, lied under oath, and tried to pay off judges. But Barrister Uma was relentless. He brought receipts, pictures, witnesses, including Chief's best man and a former housemaid. Mabel and her children were brought to court each time, looking cleaner, stronger. Reporters began to take interest. Wife of late business tycoon fights for inheritance, one headline read. Each court session felt like reopening a wound. But slowly, the truth began to shine. On the morning of the judgment, the courtroom was packed. Mabel held Ronke's hand. Simi whispered Psalm 23. The judge read the decision slowly, deliberately. The court finds the late Chief Damilola Aluko's estate was fraudulently seized. All assets are to be returned to his legally recognized wife and children. Mabel didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Teo punched the air. Simi wept quietly. Justice had come. At last. 2 days later, the mansion gates swung open again, not for Uncle Bode or Aunt Remy, but for Mabel. She walked slowly into the house with her children beside her. Everything felt different, but familiar. The pictures were still there. The chairs. Even her wedding portrait. They weren't ghosts anymore. They were home, there was no party. Just jollof rice, fried chicken, and music playing from the old speakers. Mabel danced in the kitchen with Ronke. Teo brought out his father's favorite tie and hung it in the sitting room. Simi painted again, this time, a picture of their family in front of the gates. Peace returned. But something else settled too, strength. One by one, the whispers began. Uncle Bode's lounge was closed, raided for illegal dealings. His son was arrested for fraud. Aunt Remy's husband died suddenly. Her daughter went missing for weeks. No one said it aloud, but people muttered in corners, "It's karma. They're cursed." Mabel didn't smile at the news. She didn't rejoice. She simply said, "God sees." Mabel used some of the returned wealth to build a trust for widows. She partnered with Ifani's company and launched a school scholarship fund in Chief's name. Simi returned to school. So did Teo. Ronke smiled more. They weren't just surviving now, they were rebuilding. And every time Mabel walked past the mirror in the hallway, she saw someone else. Not a widow. Not a victim. A warrior. One evening, Mabel visited Chief's grave with her children. She brought fresh flowers. Teo read aloud from a letter he'd written, "We're okay now, Daddy. We're going to be okay." Simi knelt beside the grave, tracing his name on the stone. "I'm painting again, Dad, she whispered. And Mabel stood tall. She didn't cry. She didn't mourn. She simply said, "Rest now. I kept my promise, our children are safe." The sun dipped low behind them, casting long shadows, but this time, their shadows stood in strength, not shame. The storm had passed. The Alukos had risen again.